Hello again, this is UML Operator. All right, in this session, we're going to be talking about building scenarios from requirements. I've done a few videos using use cases and other elements, but I was asked about requirements and scenarios. So we're going to step through how to accomplish this on a requirement example. Now, I have to start out by telling you that this is an intermediate course, if you will, or video. And it assumes that you're familiar with Sparks Enterprise Architect and or you have watched my basics videos. And I'm going to make a video that summarizes that for those that are just starting out on this platform, that helps you save time instead of watching hours of videos on the subject, helps you get started very quickly. But this is an intermediate level session, so I just wanted to prepare you. I'll include links below to some of the videos that I'll be referring to or referencing as we proceed. But we're going to go through this. Step one is, of course, solicitation and specification and requirements. We're going to create a simple requirement. This is a recipe for Yorkshire pudding. I thought I'd pick that one, less complicated. Then we're going to go into step two, which is analysis or analyze. And this is essentially looking at the nouns and the verbs that are in each requirement. We just have one requirement as we're going to be going through this as you analyze the requirement. And this is iterative. So that means that you're constantly coming back as you go through the requirements development lifecycle. At some point, we're going to get to step three, where we start having some fun with the scope that we've provided and looking at this from a software architect or a solution architect perspective. We're going to look at use cases that support a requirement or set of requirements, as well as components and other factors within the architecture for delivery. And then finally, we're going to dive down into development based off the scope, the nouns and the verbs that we've provided, and start completing our scenario. So this is our cover page for our project stakeholders and for this session. All right, so I'll let you imagine there are a plethora of requirements that we may want to build scenarios around as part of the specification and validation. So let's go ahead and launch step one. Step one is basically we have a requirement, and I'm going to move this over a little bit, make it a little larger so that we can see the requirement. We have a requirement for making Yorkshire pudding, and we have a basic actor action achievement story with some acceptance criteria that we're going to use. So this is the very first step, is building a requirement. Not completing it. If you've completed it, well done. But building a requirement to get started on. Building as much acceptance criteria as you can to help in validation and start your test planning. Next, we go to step two. And in step two, make this a little wider here, step two is part of analysis. And that's basically where you're taking the nouns and the verbs and you are trying to highlight them. You don't have to highlight them this way, but at least highlight them in your mind where the nouns and the verbs are. Because the nouns are going to be our attributes. They're going to be our actors within our software delivery or whatever the delivery, human delivery exercise is. The verbs are going to be part of our scenario, if you will, steps for accomplishing an acceptable amount of this requirement for delivery. As we move into step three, you can see we're taking the nouns and verbs that we have built and we're just thinking about who's going to do the what. That's what a solution architect does. They solve the problem being the requirement in this case. And so all we're doing is we're going out and collecting how many use cases are there? Is there only one? What's the scope of the use case? What's the execution environment for supporting the delivery of the requirement, features, and or use cases? And what are some basic components that are required in order to accomplish the delivery of this objective, in this case, this requirement to serve Yorkshire pudding? Now, step three could be optional. I'll leave that up to you, but it's a good idea to have at least one use case under your belt and understand who your actor is, whether it's a machine or a human, in accomplishing the objective, right? Then we roll into step 4, and again, this can be optional as well. And this is where we start looking at the development, or at least the design, because as you move out of requirements development and then you go into a cycle for solution architecture, and that's solving the problem. And then from the solution, where you've chosen the who does the what, you can start formulating at least a high-level design. And in this particular case, we're building out a class element with some attributes and some operations to support the nouns and verbs that we've discovered within our requirement. So in Sparks, you're able to bring your elements in that you want to focus on. In this case, we brought in one use case, and we brought in, of course, the requirement with the nouns and verbs to support a class element that's going to give us an idea of some functions or operations that the requirement needs, as well as potentially you want to look at some attributes, in this case, ingredients and some other components that I want to say software, that the system is touching on. So let's roll all the way back to our cover page right here. And let's see, make this a little wider. We're going to be fixing our workspace so that we can do this productively. And we're going to start looking at this particular diagram that includes what we have built in step 1 through 4. And I only need to have focus on this. So I'm going to right click on the tab and I'm going to close all except this particular diagram that we want to focus on. Now, when I select the requirement here down at the bottom, I have the notes that have the requirement content intelligence in there that is part of this requirement. So we're going to double click this requirement and open up properties. And in properties, here's of course the notes we just talked about. There's something called scenario. And we're going to select this. And what I do is copy and paste all or some of the nouns and verbs from the requirement into the structure, into the scenario, so that I can have those on the side if I need them. Otherwise, I can be focused on the notes from the requirement itself. We're going to launch the structure editor, as I've shown you a few times, and this will pop up. Now, to make this video faster, I have already put in some actions and steps in here based off the nouns and verbs, and we'll step through how that was done in just a moment. But first, I want to set up our workspace here so that I'm more productive in accomplishing what we need to do. So I have a workspace that I've already built for scenarios. Let me go ahead and select it and launch it and show you what it looks like. And in this case, I've got scenarios right here. I have the diagram we're going to be focused on. I've got responsibilities down here, which I can start building more requirements once and if they're discovered, manage constraints, and focus on scenarios. And in this video, we're just going to be focused on scenarios. Then over on the right, I have some test cases that we're going to auto-generate from our structure editor, which auto-generated some activity diagrams. In this case, one activity diagram. And what we're going to do here, browser up on the right, pan and zoom so I'm able to move around. We'll show you that in a second. And inspector. We're not going to focus on inspector, just browser and pan and zoom. And then these tabs that are down here in the lower right for me in the way that I've laid out this workspace. I'm going to go back to common and show you how to build at least a starting workspace. So in this particular case, this is my common layout. Toolbox on the left, and then I have browser up in the upper right with pan and zoom and inspector tabs. And then in the lower right, I've got notes, properties, traceability, and features, and some other things. But we're just going to be focused on properties to start here in this particular session. And I'm missing the scenarios. So we're going to bring scenarios back up here. I'm going to double click on this. Every element in the dialog has several tools or features that you can use. One of them is scenarios. We're going to launch the structure editor from here. Now, what I like to do is hold down the left mouse button and drag this tab over just to the side of my work area where my model is. And then I can size this because I don't need all of this space. I don't need all of this space, but I do want this a little wider. That might be good enough. Actually, I'm going to go this way because we're just focused on this and we're going to be going back and forth and coming to it. Now I have a workspace that is productive for me. And of course, you can save your workspace once you configure that. And I cover that in previous videos, right? So now I've got a workspace where we can start stepping through the structure editor and these steps in the scenario and how I came about them. All right, first we have the requirement itself that we're focused on selected. Over in notes here, we have the content that is part of that requirement. Make this a little wider here and something like that. And I'm focused on the nouns and the verbs here. So here I have a verb and I have a noun. And basically the action is to prepare the pudding batter, right? So the very first action that I extracted from the requirement content is the first step, right? The second one is beat 2 eggs until foamy, right? There we go. And then I go through and look at these for actions. This content, nouns and verbs, adjective here, adverb there. Don't, English professors out there, please don't hammer me. I look for the actions that I can extract from this and the steps to follow them. Your acceptance criteria may not come in this organized. It may be all over the board. So you're searching for actions that are going to be part of the scenario, the steps, the flow necessary to deliver the objective for a particular requirement, feature, or scope item. In addition, when we're looking through the content here, we're looking for how are we going to handle exceptions? Are there any alternate paths that we need to think about? And in the structure editor, I have the ability to add exceptions, cancel. I have the ability to add alternate paths. Now, I started with 2 alternate paths and then I removed them, but they're still there that I can go to if I want to or need to. But in this case, I have a basic path. You can see here, happy path, the flow, and I have 2 exceptions. One is, what if the oven is not at 400 degrees? So let's go ahead and double click this one. Check the temperature. Is 400 degrees? And then you could add some other steps. Then it returns back to step 5. You select the steps once you've built them. We have 10 steps here. It goes back to 5. So this is 4A, not back to, it goes to it, forwards in the flow. So it goes from 4, we have an exception. Is it 400 degrees? If the answer is yes in that decision element, it's going to go to step 5. Then we have another exception thrown at step 6, and that is, well, we want to prepare the muffin pans, the baking pan, for the ingredients that we're going to pour into it. So let's go ahead and look at this one. Very simple, 2 steps. Again, elaborate the amount of steps that needs to get through the exception or the alternate path, and then have some sort of outcome on the end, whether you're ending the whole thing, going right to end, or you're now can go back to another step. Maybe it's in the beginning, or maybe it's the next step, but have a conclusion at each one of your exceptions and alternates. We're going to go back to basic path. So in the basic path here, you can see that in 6A exception, it's taking us to 7. So heat the muffin pans. Yeah, they're heated. They're ready to go, right? Then pour, bake 30 minutes, transfer, and then serve, right? So these are our steps. So once you've completed this, and at any point, you can always run an activity diagram. And we're going to run an activity diagram. We don't need to do these other ones for this particular demonstration. we're going to select activity diagram. And you can synchronize with the current one, or you can overwrite. We're going to overwrite. So I've already run one, may run 10 more, right? But we're going to overwrite that one. We run it. And now we have an activity diagram. This is where pan and zoom comes in, where I can go through the flow, all right? So let me make this a little wider here, and I can move down through the flow based on the scenarios that we just built. So you can see in this, we have a start, we're rolling through, we throw a first exception, we have a flow that takes us hopefully to this point. Now you can add in other exceptions where it's not 400 degrees. Well, then go back, right? But we're going to keep this simple. So again, we get to our next exception and we get to our next one. And this one's good enough. So we're going to leave it at this, all right? So in this case, what we want to do is close the activity diagram, go back here, check everything that we have. We're ready to go. Let's build a test case. So here in this menu selection, I have the ability to build test cases. We're going to build an internal test case. So I go ahead and select it, and it generates a test case based off of what we just accomplished in our scenario and our activity diagram. So the basic path, here's the steps. The alternate paths, there aren't any. And the exceptions, we have 2, all right? And then what you see over in test cases, as soon as we did this, for me, test cases is over on the right. If you don't have that, you just go to the construct tab, you go to the test management, and you select whichever test scenario you're doing. I just have all right? And in this particular case, I have these that we want to run if necessary. I'm just going to do the first one in here. So it steps through everything that's necessary in the test, and then it gives, what the input needs to be that during test planning, what the outcome was, or what the acceptance criteria summarized by the test planner, and then the results once the test is done. And then, not run, pass, fail, deferred, canceled. So this automatically builds out your test cases as well for your delivery. All right, I hope this video didn't scare you off. This is really pretty simple. I think some of you, they're going, UML operator, I have 150 requirements. You don't have to do it for every one. It's basically when you come across a requirement that you're struggling with, or you have more questions on, or you want to challenge the client stakeholders or whoever the stakeholder is in the requirement, because it could be a functional requirement, a business requirement, a non-functional requirement, whoever the stakeholder of that is, you want to challenge them. Doing scenarios is the best way, because you'll notice that if I go to notes here on this, I was able to extract or elicit more requirements. So what I tend to do is highlight, well, do we need a requirement for turning the oven on? Now you can imagine that this is a software system, booting up the server, rebooting the server, relaunching some code, fall back on the code. You can imagine what requirements you may generate just from this elicitation, just from this validation exercise, following the specification at least that we have here. So I tend to use color coding for, these are my attributes, my actors, these are my functions, these are potentially new requirements, could be risks, could be just assumptions, and everything for me starts out as an assumption. This requirement, if I double click and open up properties, I set it to a type assumption, which is I created this special type. You learn about that in another video. But I start every requirement out, even every feature out, as an assumption type. And then eventually they'll graduate to a particular type of requirement as we're more comfortable in our validation exercises. So very, very powerful tool to help you deliver your architecture and what you're trying to accomplish within that architecture. So Let's regenerate this and have this up as an example. So regenerate anytime you want. If you spend a lot of time to reorganize your activity diagram, don't step on it. You can actually write over it. So you can come in here. We're going to leave it up. We're going to launch this again. You can synchronize and maybe preserve the layout. You're going to want to do, then hit OK, and it will go through and synchronize your updates from the work you've done as you're working through iterations. Again, I hope this video helped you. Please leave comments down below, questions, concerns, good or bad, but let us know what you want to see, what you need help on. That helps us help you, all right? So y'all take care until the next time that we meet, and until then, happy modeling.